Hello, everyone. My name's David Hearst, and I'm very honored to be here with two people who literally hold the fate of Libya in their hands. To my left is Professor Ghassan Salamé, who's the, as everyone knows here, is the special representative of the UN Secretary General and the head of mission. And to my right is Mohamed Taher Syala, the Foreign Minister of the Government of National Accord in Tripoli. Just a few introductory remarks. I picked up at least, if we're talking about dialogue, the first thing we need to do with dialogue is to recognize the legitimacy of the people you are talking to. And there were two notable speakers yesterday who didn't do that. Both were Egyptian. One referred to the so-called government of national accord, and the other referred to the authorities in Tripoli as militias. And it saddens me that we have a conference like this where you have speakers who speak in this way. I will start first with Professor Salamé, and we're discussing basically three broad themes. One is the situation in Libya today, what actually is happening on the ground. The second theme is the extent of foreign interference, and there was a very detailed document by a panel of experts that my publication published quite recently, just detailing how many countries had boots on the ground in Libya, and it's an extraordinarily long list. And the third, but most interesting part, is what is for the future? How can we move forward here? When will Professor Salamé, who's uniquely placed to do this because of the legitimacy of his office, will be in a position to start a political roadmap? Okay. So, Professor Salamé, could we start first with just a brief view from you of the current situation on the ground in Libya?
Well, the situation in Libya is, or has been, characterized since the 4th of April by an attempt of Mr. Haftar troops to get into Tripoli. I'm sorry to say that the attack started while my boss, the Secretary General, was visiting Libya. And I am even more sorry because this attack took place exactly 10 days before something the UN mission, has been working on for more than a year. That is the national conference we were going to gather in the city of Ghadames. I have to tell you that I was personally very disappointed because we have been working for a year on that conference, and because out of the 156 invitations we have launched to influential Libyans to come and gather and agree among themselves, the 156 invitation had been accepted. So a new episode of the Libyan crisis that has been going for many years started on that day, the 4th of April. 4 months into this war, the only change that we have seen on the ground is the fact that the city of Gharian, that has been taken by Mr. Haftar troops, was retaken by the GNA or pro-GNA troops. Otherwise, we have witnessed a stalemate on the ground. A stalemate that meant that certain villages or farms or areas have been taken and retaken by both sides many times. Of late, two new developments were palpable. The first one is the intensive use of drones, making Libya one of the countries, if not the country in the world, where drones are used so intensively in fighting. In fact, the mission has recorded like 800 hits from drones from the LNA side and some 270 from the GNA side. And the second characteristic is something that was visible from the first day of the war, that is, there is a lack of warriors in this war. This is a war with very few warriors. Because if you take a front long of many dozens of kilometers, you would expect in other countries to have thousands and thousands, and possibly tens of thousands of fighters on each side. This was never the case in Libya. Therefore, there was a place open, ready for mercenaries coming from other countries and joining the battle. These two factors have led to an escalation in the conflict. And in recent days, this escalation was palpable. In the compound where I live with my colleagues, we didn't hear much of the bombing in the first 8 months of the war, but now we wake up and we sleep with them. Certain areas are now directly threatened in Tripoli itself. In fact, most of the fighting has taken place so far in areas that are half rural, half urban. So yes, there are probably more than 2,000 fighters killed already, and possibly 200 to 300 civilians, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people. But if the fighting comes closer to fully urbanized areas, the kind of figures will know a completely different magnitude. And therefore, what keeps me awake at night is the fact that the fighting can get into intensively urbanized areas. Because then, for casualties, for fatalities, for IDPs, we will be dealing with a completely different level of losses. That is why I believe that we need to stop this war. And I regret to say that deep divisions in the international system right now have prevented the Security Council from calling for a ceasefire, which it does in other conflicts. Not in all conflicts, but at least in other conflicts. The Security Council has met already 15 times on Libya since the beginning of this war. It has been briefed once by the Secretary General, 3 times by his deputy, and 11 times by myself. But we have been unable to extract a call for a ceasefire from the Security Council. That is why we have been trying to get this result by other means, of which I can tell you when you ask me about the future.
Talking about the sort of extent of foreign, you mentioned foreign mercenaries. There's a very good report, as I said, by the panel of experts that mentioned, validated the presence of Sudanese troops. We know about the role of the Emiratis and Egypt, but we didn't know about the involvement of Jordan. All of this in contravention of a UN resolution 1937. And it talked about virtually a free-for-all where the countries don't even disguise or attempt to disguise their involvement. It didn't talk about the presence of Russian mercenaries. They have been documented. This is the presence of the Wagner group, using special bullets that enter your body but never exit it. We know also that it was Libya that was the start of the Russian philosophy to intervene in Syria eventually. That's what triggered it originally. How worried are you about specifically the Russian intervention, if that is? And are there signs that this could be the forefront of a bigger Russian involvement, as was the case in Syria?
It could be. You have to ask the Russians themselves. They will not confide to me what their strategy is. What is important for us to know is that since the beginning of this war, the level of external interference in the Libyan crisis has gone up in different ways, in diplomatic alignments, in the furniture of weapons, in the presence on the ground, boots on the ground, and in also technical support and advice. This applies to the two parties, although one party is more reliant than the other on this external help. However, this could not be allowed to happen ad infinitum. And that is why, while in the first 18 months of my presence in Libya, I have been devoting most of my efforts, in fact, all my efforts, to bring the Libyans together, to concentrate on the domestic political process, to bring together the municipalities, and we were successful in doing that, to bring closer to each other the parliament in Tobruk and the HCS in Tripoli. And we have been able to have them together, meeting in Tunis and keeping this relationship since. To bring together also Tripoli and Tarhuna when the two cities were in war against each other, and the mission has been able to produce a ceasefire on its own in September 2018. To bring together also members of the civil society from all the sides. And all this was supposed to lead to a national conference. So my efforts were concentrating on the domestic scene, and I was trying to sort of keep or contain the foreign influence. But with the war going, the external interference becoming much more intense, the furniture of weapons becoming almost on YouTube, and new kind of equipment coming into the country, and the unavailability of the Security Council to produce a call for a ceasefire, I have, and I assume that, I have changed my strategy. That's why I went to the Security Council on the 29th of July of this year and said, we cannot go like this. We are not going to produce a ceasefire by bringing the two sides together. This is not feasible. And that is why I asked the Security Council for its support for a new line. And this new line would start by an act that would be symbolic, that is a truce for Eid al-Adha. And the two sides accepted this, although there were some violations. But all in all, we had a few days of respite. And the second step is to bring together the permanent 5 members of the Security Council plus a few other countries in order to try and rebuild a minimal consensus, international consensus, on the international community position on Libya. Because the polarization in Libya was reflected and nourished by polarization on the regional level, and more recently by polarization on the international level. That is what is called the Berlin process. The Berlin process is an attempt in application of the brief I did to the Security Council on the 29th of July, and that was accepted by the Security Council, to try and rebuild a minimum understanding among powers that have influence over the Libyan crisis, to come together and have a minimal understanding, so that what the sterility of the Security Council has been hurting us and hurting the Libyans for some time be put to an end. And the third step would be a Libyan dialogue that would start immediately after, but with this international umbrella recomposed or restructured before, so that we are not faced with what we faced in the first 2 years, at least of my tenure in Libya. That is, we bring together the Libyans, but always there is a foreign factor that comes and destroys this rapprochement among Libyans.
What are your hopes for Berlin? What do you think is the minimum that you think you can get in Berlin?
Well, there are 3 principles that have been agreed in Berlin. The first one is that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. That means that we have 6 baskets, the various countries, and 3 regional organizations, the African Union, the League of Arab States, and the European Union, who are present and participating in these preparatory meetings. A first basket concerning a mechanism for a ceasefire. A second, a mechanism to make the arms embargo applicable, while we know that at least 45 violations of the arms embargo have been noticed since the 4th of April. And 3, the return to the political process. The fourth basket is this package of economic and financial reforms we will put before our Libyan friends. And the fifth is a new security arrangements for Tripoli and its outskirts, including a DDR process. And finally, 6 baskets is the international humanitarian law. So the first principle is that we need to agree on all this. And I can tell you that the latest meeting we had in Berlin that took place on the 20th of November has been very productive. In fact, we have almost agreed on the 6 baskets. There are still a few details here and there, but to a large extent we have agreed, and that's why I hope that the next meeting that is going to take place on the 10th of December, that is in 3 days from now, would be the last preparatory meeting. The second point on which we agreed is that, contrary to other international events that took place concerning Libya in the past 7 or 8 years, this one will have a follow-up committee of all countries and participating and other countries as well, in order not to leave the mission alone to implement such a huge program. We need a commitment of the countries to be by the side of the mission in a follow-up committee to make sure that there is an implementation of what's agreed upon in Berlin and what is agreed upon in the Libyan dialogue. And 3, and this is absolutely crucial, we also agreed, because some parties in Libya and some countries want this basket in particular, others are pushing for this basket in particular, we agreed on the principle of a contemporary implementation of the 6 baskets, so that nobody feels cheated because the request of one party has been implemented, but his own request has been left to the future. And this is what happened, to be very honest, with the Skhirat agreement. In the Skhirat agreement, there are whole chapters that have never been implemented. We don't want this to happen again, and that's why we are calling for a contemporary implementation of the 6 baskets.
What guarantee would there be that this would hold on the ground and that the various forces would stick to the agreement and not point the finger at someone else and say, there's a provocation here, there's a provocation? What would be the mechanism for enforcing a ceasefire?
The follow-up committee. The follow-up committee should produce an armed monitor of the ceasefire. The follow-up committee should convey to us imagery and intelligence concerning the violation of the...
Does this involve UN troops on the ground?
I don't think so. I don't think the Libyans would accept blue berets on the ground, and I don't think you will find many countries ready and willing to send blue berets on the ground.
But you're satisfied that a mechanism, if the will was there, could be achieved to monitor what had been agreed in public, and because that's the whole course of the war is breaking agreements
I think
of some sort.
The answer is in your question. If there is a will, I have my doubts about the existence of this will. I'm not naive, and the Secretary General is not naive. We know that the international system is now heavily polarized. We know that the extraction of an international consensus on anything, not Libya, on anything, is a very, very difficult thing to do. Still, we have two arguments we need to keep in mind. The first argument is that the interests sought by most of those who are interfering in Libya can be served by a peaceful and prosperous Libya better than by a divided Libya. If you want oil interest, if you want an end to the migration, if you want to put an end to terrorist cells across the Mediterranean, if you want all this, you better have a peaceful and prosperous Libya. Libya has enough means and wealth to content all those who are fighting for its soil. This is the first argument. The second argument is that the alternative is just horrible. If we do not come to implement what I tried to explain to you, I fear a bloodbath in Tripoli. I fear a heavy movement of migration. I fear people fleeing Idlib and settling in Libya. I fear instability in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Algeria, in all neighboring countries, and these countries taking in Niger, in Chad, Sudan. And I also fear that we add to an already heavy list of things on which great powers are not agreeing, a new file to this list. Therefore, yes, if we still care for some level of collective security in the world, if we still care for a minimum understanding on containing local conflicts, if we don't do that in Libya, the strategic location of the country will make headaches for everybody, not for the neighbors, but way beyond their neighbors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, can I turn to you?
Yes.
We just had a very, very eloquent rundown of the scale of the problem in Libya. Can I ask you very bluntly, is Tripoli in danger of falling?
Yes, it is dangerous to certain limits. But I believe I'm still living there all the time. And there are fighters who believe that there is no way of Haftar taking Tripoli. And they are fighting, they believe that they are protecting the civilians, protecting 3.5 million civilians in the country. And they are asking a very big, valid question, why the international community, they protected the civilians in 2011 and they are not protecting them today? Is a very valid question. But I mean, I'm seeing the escalation of the Russian help to him, using that much of drones, that much of fighters. The risk is there, of course.
Can I ask you what I asked Professor Salamé? Do you think the Russian involvement will just grow and grow quietly, as was the case in Syria?
It depends on a lot of measures, actually. It depends on what United Nations and Germany is doing for this Berlin process. It depends on the these preparatory sessions, are they honest when they promise that they will look for a civilian solution? I think this is the answer for this, and maybe Dr. Ghassan can answer this because he's there. I'm not there in these preparatory meetings.
What are your hopes for the Berlin process?
We are hanging a lot of hopes on Berlin process, on what United Nations is doing, but I believe myself that in the absence, in the solving the existing division in the United Nations, and mainly in the Security Council, the division in the Arab League, and division also in the European Union, it will be rather very difficult to reach an agreement in Berlin process. We have to start from there, where there is a divisions, to pave the way for Berlin process to be successful.
I mean, in particular, you mentioned the Europeans, but in particular, would you comment on the role that France has played in Libya? There was a moment last year and the year before where French boots were on the ground and Italian ones as well on different sides. France appears to be playing both sides of this at once. Would you comment on what France is trying to achieve in Libya?
Don't forget that France is one of the Libyan colonies. They are colonies of our south, and they have their own strategic towards Libya. They are there in the exploration and production of oil. And they are jealous when we constructed this pipeline linking north of Libya with the south of Italy. It is France. They are very jealous as well, and they are not happy Libya being not part of the Francophonie in the North Africa. You have all this history together, actually. And France, they are ignoring that they have any presence in Libya till the accident of their helicopter in Benghazi. Then they have nothing to hide. And then it was the big, when they discovered these Javelin rockets in Garian, after we liberated Garian from the hand of Haftar. So I think, to start with, you have to prepare the Arab League, the Security Council, and the European Union. Then you can expect success to Berlin Conference.
That's quite a lot of repair work to do.
Yes. And that's why always I kept saying to my friend that your mission is, I don't say impossible, but it's difficult. But we are very happy that we are having Dr. Ghassan. He knows the area, and he speaks the same language, and he knows a lot of things. So we are trying to help him.
The war is stalemated at the moment, but as Professor Salamé said, there's every indication the casualties could get worse. Do you think that you could get to a stage when there are real political discussions between the Libyans? Let's just talk specifically about your appreciation of the political forces within Libya, and not just talk about foreign interference, but actually talk about the political interaction amongst Libyans on the ground, and all the various claims of legitimacy that there are.
We are tackling it. It's not a pure Libyan problem from the time of inception. From when it started, the interference in Libya, NATO interference to protect the Libyans, it's all together. It is not a local problem that you can solve it just locally. You have to take care about the foreign interference. It is Egypt there, it's Emirates there, it's Saudi Arabia there, France is there, the Russians are there. Those are there clearly and loudly. There are others. So I think you cannot solve Libyans alone. If you take them alone, they cannot solve their problem. It started, I mean, when it started, just, I mean, a local war, and then it's developed. Now it is an air war, very advanced one. It's drone war. A lot of technological weapons are there, very advanced. It's not the weapons that we inherited from the Gaddafi regime, where it's weapons of 1943. And still, this war is fueled by some countries putting a lot of money, a lot of artillery, weapons, and so on. So I think, as Dr. Ghassan mentioned, you have to pave the way. You have to have some sort of compromise from the international community, and then you come to the Libyan. I think the best solution that we reach a ceasefire, and then you start the process. I am worried that while we are preparing for Berlin conference, waving the way for the ceasing fire, and you are witnessing General Haftar inside Tripoli. And then the war will not be a drone war, it will be a street war. Simply because, I mean, most of the houses, they have to fight for their children, and they have means for fighting. Don't forget, they inherited from Gaddafi regime a lot of weapons. It is in every house, and a lot of trained people as well. And then I think we are facing a bloodshed. This is what worried me. So, I mean, we have to go parallel, preparing for a Berlin conference. It will take time, but what's urgent is to cease fire and to stop war.
And how close is that ceasefire, or in your, how do you feel the military situation on the ground? Is it so deadlocked that the situation will be the same in a few months' time, or are you actually pessimistic?
I think there is a development. This is the Russia involvement and the mercenaries involvement. There is a lot of mercenaries. It's not only the Russian. We have a lot of Chadian opposition. We have the Sudanese opposition. And they are real mercenaries. They fight for this side, and sometimes they fight against. But anyhow, it's not a miracle to cease fire, because simply Dr. Ghassan, he succeeded in Eid. Last Eid, to at least for 2-3 days, they succeeded to do that. And I'm not seeing it impossible. But he needs to be supported. The international community has to support what he's doing.
Do you think the international community understands what Dr. Ghassan was saying, that if we allow this war to continue, this will have incredibly important effects, for instance, on migration? Migration is only going to go northwards to Europe. It's not going to go anywhere else. Does, for instance, France understand this? Or when the international community, does it understand how much more dangerous the Libyan civil war could become?
It is dangerous, and they know that it is dangerous. They are just mentioning those in the detention centers where are not exceeding any time. They haven't exceeded 25,000, and this is the capacity of the detention centers. And they are ignoring that we are having around the streets more than 700,000. And they are prepared to jump through the Mediterranean to Europe. And from those, usually we use it to accommodate almost up to 2.5 million migrants. We are offering them opportunity to work during our development schemes before happening of this war. So the solution will be stability for the country, the reform that will absorb the migration problems. And this is our belief from the beginning. And to help us in sealing our southern border, because Europe is concentrating on the sea, while the problem is not on the sea. I mean, the border of Europe starts at our south, in our border with Sudan, Niger, Chad, and this area.
What then was the purpose of bombing Tajura? A center for 53 died in that bombing.
I think you have to ask who bombed it.
Was it a pure terror act?
We are finding any reason. Just it is a criminal act. It's a criminal war, and I'm not seeing even the will to punish who make it. Although it is declared even by United Nations.
I'm just thinking, I'm saying that because I'm thinking even if a ceasefire is declared, could you sit down at a table with someone like General Haftar?
I think history teaches us that after ceasefire anywhere, there must be a sort of negotiations. Who's going to be involved? It's up to the people to decide. I'm not seeing it impossible, because if it is impossible, it means that there is no solution. You have to be open to sit with everybody, and somebody is representing. There can be indirect negotiations. Always there is a way of doing it. Maybe it starts with indirect negotiation. This is how I look to it. But let's have the war stop first.
And do you think that there is a temptation on the other side to, with this influx of mercenaries, just to keep fighting until they've got enough of a stranglehold on Tripoli that changes the balance of power? You actually have two important provinces dominated by the other side at the moment. They've territorially, they've got much more control of the territory of Libya. Wouldn't they simply just be tempted to carry on?
I think he's targeting the capital because the capital is a capital. And if you control the capital, it gives the sign that you are controlling all other areas. That's why he's targeting Tripoli. Although he knows that it is very, very difficult and very dangerous.
And talking of the international community, what indications are you getting from Britain, from America, from Germany, supporting a real ceasefire and a real peace process? I mean, speaking as a Britain, we're just about to have an election. Our foreign policy is very quiet at the moment. Our diplomats are extremely quiet. There is no British minister that I'm aware of here in the Med conference. There have been in the past. I'm describing a situation to you where Britain in particular, but I have a feeling also America as well, is completely wrapped up in its own political instability and problems, and seems to have abdicated responsibility in the Mediterranean, if that's not too strong a way of putting it. What hopes do you have of the real engagement needed by the old powers in the Middle East to push this process further? Because their absence here at this conference is really an indicator of what I'm talking about.
Myself, I'm considering always Britain as the most mature country when it comes to politics, and they are doing our best, no doubt of this. And you can ask Dr. Ghassan how many times they tried in the Security Council, and we are benefiting from them being the pen holder. They are trying every time to draft a resolution, but the problem in the Security Council that cannot pass through. And from all these sessions, we get only one resolution at the end after 8 months of fighting. So I think Britain is trying, but the problem is coming from other countries. But we need to be helped by other countries rather than UK. Germany is helping, but our problem comes mainly from France, from other countries.
And if your main challenge is in the Security Council, and I assume what you mean is that your main challenge now is Russia, how would you then persuade the Russians to? Lavrov was here. He said he had, in Russian, he said he had good relations with your Prime Minister. I'm not sure he has, but he claimed he had. How would you go about convincing the Russians not to play the same role in Libya that they played in Syria?
I myself know the Russian from a very close distance. I have been negotiating with them many times, and the problem with Russia that they are declaring something and we are seeing something different on the ground. And when we approach them, they say this is a private company, Wagner has nothing to do with the government and so on. And of course, Russia is looking for Libya as a very strategic location, no doubt of this. And they tried, even with the old regime, they tried to have a presence. It's not a secret. And maybe they're still dreaming of their strategy, the old strategy, which cannot be implemented on the ground. But for the time being, they are hanging on these private mercenaries and so on. And still, we have a contact with them. It's ongoing contact. This is how I see Russia.
You both sound very pessimistic. Could you say something to us that lifts this discussion? We just got finally moment. One statement from you, sir, and one statement from you about the future of Libya.
I think it is the problem of the Libyan wealth who created the problem. I can say to any country that if it is the mutual interest, we are there. We are prepared to negotiate and to safeguard their interests. But if they are only looking to their interests without considering the Libyan interests, then we cannot work together. And we want to satisfy we know that we have a very good location. We are in the middle of the world. If you look to the map, we are in the middle of the world. We are the real gateway to Africa. We are linking Europe, Africa, and Asia, and we have a lot of potential. And that's why when we signed a memorandum of understanding with Turkey, I mean, a huge reaction comes in, while it is a very normal memorandum of understanding of protecting our rights in a strip. It's only with width of 111 kilometers, 0.7, in between the shores of Turkey and the shores of Libya at the end of our east, between Al-Burdi and Derna. It's a very small strip, and it is our right, it is our goal to protect the Libyan interest. And that will involve a lot of interest for the European as well. Either it will be ExxonMobil, or it will be Eni, or it will be Total, who will be benefiting with us. So if it is a joint benefit, we are ready to do that. But if there is a dream of a colonial period, we are not prepared, and we are prepared to fight.
Thank you. So, one final comment.
Well, thank you. I don't understand exactly the difference between pessimism and optimism. I never use these words. I think that when you are faced with a challenge, either you are active or you are resigned and passive. When you are faced with a problem, your role is to be active and try to solve it, and to try with all your consciousness and your sense of duty. You never ask yourself, what are your chances of success or failure? I never do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both of you. That was very good. Thank you.